When I first unlocked the door to the shuttered doll shop, a bell chimed somewhere deep inside, like a small throat clearing itself in a cold church. That sound seemed too loud for a place so layered with dust. The sign above the window, frosted and cracked, read H. Verbeek, Dollmaker in old gold script. I hadn't planned to live above a doll shop. It just happened to be the only place I could afford for 3 months while I cataloged folk artifacts at the museum across the canal. I told myself the coincidence was quaint. I told myself a lot of things that evening. The interior still held the soft geometry of commerce. Counters, display cases, a polished register with a liver as delicate as a wrist bone. A white sheet covered a long glass cabinet, and I could see the rise of heads beneath it, shapes like moons under snowdrifts. Dust lay across the hardwood floor in a way that recorded every footstep, as if the store had been writing a slow diary of neglect. The smell was dense and particular. Old wood, varnish, lavender sachets long exsanguinated of scent, a ghostlight of something sweet and animal. Glue, perhaps, or shellac. The apartment upstairs was a short, steep climb. The banister was slick as a worn violin neck, and my fingertip came away yellow. In the flat, my voice folded back to me as if the rooms were cupped hands. Single window, slanted roof, a kitchenette the size of a suitcase, bed frame with a missing slat. I set my bag down, leaned my bicycle against the wall, and opened the window. The canal made small waterwords below, and somewhere a tram bell dinged, an echo of the shop's chime. I made tea on the stove. The kettle hissed. The light outside slid into evening. I grew used to the silence, the way you grow used to the sensation of your own tongue. That first night, I dreamed of spools. They unrolled across a table by themselves, red thread making long arterial paths that tethered buttons to marbles, marbles to brass keys, keys to teeth. I woke at 3:17 a.m. with a taste of metal in my mouth and the sense of someone having just moved away from the side of the bed. Silence lay so thick it felt quilted. Then the bell downstairs, just once, a polite visitor in an empty town. I lay there, counting, 1, 2, 3. A soft click, a shutter, the sound of a drawer pushed back into place. Pipes, I told myself. Pipes and settling. A city building sighs like a living thing at that hour, and every building has its dialect. Yet in the morning when I went down to the shop, I noticed a narrow trail drawn in the dust along the display cases, like something had been dragged with care. At the end of the trail, the glass cabinet. The sheet had slipped an inch. I shouldn't have lifted it. But the sheet made the kind of invitation a person can't refuse, like a book left open to exactly the line that will ruin you. Under the sheet, 7 porcelain girls watched me from within. Their eyes were blown glass, a certain shade of lake blue that diluted the rest of the room. They had human hair, or a close imitation, pinned and braided with small silk ribbons faded to rose. Their mouths were slips of pink shell, too precise to be sweet. They stood on stands with brass rods like spinal cords. Beneath each was a handwritten card, neat as surgical stitches. Anya, 1913. Heike, 1909. Ava, 1911. 4 others had their cards turned backward. Something about the cards made me think of tombstones. I put the sheet back. For 2 days I did not touch the cabinet again. I moved my life into the apartment in slow, ceremonial movements. A stool by the window, a plant on the sill, a stack of books beside the bed like a polite barricade. The museum's work was tedious but comfortingly so. In the evenings I read, the pages turning with the soft swish of a dress. The bell downstairs kept its good manners. Once on the 2nd night, twice on the 3rd. On the 4th night the bell rang, and then I heard a soft clicking. The exact rhythm of a treadle sewing machine operated by a patient foot. On the 5th, the whole place changed. It rained so heavily that the canal lost its voice. Wind worried the old wood around me. The window breathed dampness. I decided to explore the back rooms of the shop to make myself feel less like a squatter in a stranger's lung. Past the public space, a narrow door opened into a corridor with walls stained the color of nicotine. On the left, a small office held a desk with a banker's lamp and a ledger. On the right, a workroom splayed its guts. Trestle tables, a block of beeswax like a slab of amber, delicate saws, a shelf of glass eyes arranged by hue with an ornithologist's care. There were heads, untinted porcelain, stacked in a crate like a congregation waiting for absolution. A phonograph perched in the corner, its brass horn dim with fingerprints. a tin of needles, a dozen wooden hands articulated with gilt cords. I ran a fingertip across the ledger's cover. It left a clean streak like a parted curtain. The paper inside was thick and faintly rippled with age. Entries began in 1897 and marched forward. Dates, names, brief notes that used the same words in different order. Acquired, traded, commissioned, repaired, replaced. The handwriting never changed. On one page, a list of materials flowed like a shopping poem. Horsehair, human hair, cotton, wool, bone, pigment, vows, lavender, thread, silk, thread gut, thread brown. I frowned. My reflection in the lamp glass centered my face in a green circle. I flipped further and something chilled me. A page of rules printed on paper that seemed newer, the ink less sullen. Pin the ribbon to the hem. Shade the mirror at night. Never name the likeness before the last stitch. If the bell rings while no one is there, count. If it rings 7 times, do not answer. My name is Nora. I heard it in my head suddenly, in someone else's cadence, like a line read from a script. I shut the ledger. A small sensation pulled at my wrist. When I looked down, the cuff of my sweater had snagged on a stray thread, so fine I couldn't see it unless I moved. I twisted my hand to free the yarn and noticed a faint indentation ring around my wrist, as if I'd worn a tight ribbon in my sleep. I rubbed it until my skin warmed. On the way back through the shop, the bell rang. It took me a second to realize the door hadn't opened. "Wind," I said out loud, and my voice was wrong, small in the huge quiet. That night I dreamt again. The workshop had changed scale. I was tiny and careful, standing on the workbench beside the phonograph. A cylinder turned and crackled, and through the brassy scream I made out words, "Hold still, only one more stitch." The needle of the machine, thin as a hair, punctured the soft underside of my wrist and drew a red thread out of me like a secret. I woke with the impression of blood but found none. Only that indentation ring, deeper now, as if whatever ribbon I wasn't wearing had been tightened. I needed out. Fresh air, a cafe, people muttering into cups. The front door resisted me, swollen with rain. As I leaned into it, the bell above my head jangled, close enough to make my ear ring. At that exact moment, the phonograph in the back room coughed and turned itself a fraction. The brass horn watched the doorway like a predatory flower. I wrestled the door open into the weather and stood on the threshold, letting the canal breathe in my face. I stayed that way until my shirt clung, and I could be sure the sound behind me was only the slow unwinding of machines that didn't know they were dead. I worked late at the museum, cataloging a collection of children's toys donated by someone's estate, a wooden train with one wheel missing, a music box in the shape of a hare whose eyes opened and shut, a hand-stitched cloth doll with a seam across its neck like a healed wound. The labels were half faded. Some bore the name Verbeek. When I asked the archivist about it, she wrinkled her nose. "Old family of dollmakers," she said. "They specialized in restorations. People used to bring them broken dolls to fix. Poppenspreeker, doll clinic, like a doctor. There were some rumors." Her voice stepped down a stair. "Anyway, it's all long ago. That shop closed decades ago." "It hasn't," I said before I could walk my words back. "I mean, it's closed, but it's still there." She gave me a look that took my temperature. "You're staying above it, aren't you? I've passed it, the one with the frost on the window, the bell that rings in no weather." She paused, and when she spoke again, her tone was lighter by force. "Be careful. Old shops keep old habits." Back at the flat, my plant had toppled from the sill. Soil lay like coffee grounds across the floor. At first I thought wind, then realized the window was latched. The sheet in the front room had slid off the cabinet entirely. The 7 porcelain girls were perfectly still, heads slightly inclined, as if the room had spoken and they were trying to hear better. On the shelf behind them, someone had arranged 7 narrow boxes like books. They were numbered, and each bore a thin ribbon pinned at its base with an old-fashioned pearl-headed pin. I don't know why I opened the second box instead of the first. Inside, a braid of hair lay coiled, chestnut dark. A faded tag tied to it read Ava in that same precise hand. Under the braid, a narrow slip of paper. For emphasis, a whisper. For silence, a stitch. A movement nudged the edge of my vision. I turned, slow as a hinge. In the reflection of the glass cabinet behind my shoulder, the doorway to the workroom was not empty. A man stood there, reflected, his face more shadow than feature, the outline of a hat drawn like a cutout. I wheeled around. The doorway held only air. But when the phonograph sang in a low murmur, I screamed, and the sound folded back on itself and died as if the room held no air to carry it. The horn faced me. The cylinder spun. Names, it said in a man's patient Dutch. Names are pattern. Pattern is promise. Promise keeps the face from slipping. The needle hissed. The bell rang once from nowhere and everywhere. My hands shook so badly I could not put the braid back. I set it on the counter and, without meaning to, lifted the sheet of the cabinet all the way off. Beneath the 7 porcelain girls was a space. A blank on the shelf between Heike and a girl whose card was turned backward. A vacant stand, a little brass rod waiting for a spine. I had the thought, as distinct and quiet as a droplet striking a bowl, there's a place for me. I backed away, found the stairs by accident, climbed until my thighs burned. The flat looked smaller than before, too shallow to contain a person. I shut the door behind me and locked it, knowing it was a gesture. When I turned toward the mirror over the sink, I saw a ribbon around my wrist, red as a mouth. I raised my arm. The ribbon was not there. The indentation was. The night stretched like a thread pulled between 2 pins. At intervals, the bell downstairs ticked. I learned to recognize the sound of the phonograph winding, a careful weight turning a careful crank. The workshop settled and unsettled. Once my door handle moved. It was not the wind. I waited for daylight. When it came, thin and watery, I went down. The ledger waited on the desk, the lamp waiting above it like an interrogator. I opened it with a speed I meant to demonstrate as courage. The last written page wasn't from the 1930s or 40s as I'd expected. It was blank. As I watched, words bloomed on the paper like something written in lemon juice brought to heat. Acquired, Nora, no surname recorded. 3 months temporary lodging. Material, hair, ribbon, red, vow, unspoken, thread, brown. Status, likeness in progress, name withheld. It's not possible to feel your shadow recoil and still remain inside it, but that's what happened. My body tried to flee without me. I slammed the ledger shut and shook it as if I could shake the words off. The phonograph clicked from the other room, pitying. The bell rang. Once, twice. I whispered along, a demented host counting guests. At the 7th, the rules touched my shoulder and turned me to face them. I flipped back and read them again, finger moving like a rod across a doll's back. Do not answer. My body parted the air toward the door anyway. The shop made other decisions. Something tugged at my wrist, light at first, then insistent. I looked down to see the smallest thread imaginable trailing from the ring of my skin to the darkness beneath the work table. It glinted brown when the light hit it. With the other hand, I grabbed and pulled. The thread gave like spit, and then I felt it in my nerves, that faint, barbaric tug from inside me. I did not pull again. Instead, I reached for the nearest thing that could cut. A seam ripper in the tin of needles. It was wicked and precise, a tiny hook for undoing history. I placed the point beneath the thread, just where it disappeared into my flesh. I counted to 3, which felt like passing through 3 doors. When I cut, pain made a flower inside my arm. I saw black, and then saw the room again. A drop of blood welled and then paused, as if unsure whether to go on. The thread fell slack. A wind moved through the shop, though the windows stayed shut. The 7 porcelain girls turned their heads to look at me. I heard the click. No, I felt it, inside my own mouth, like my teeth were trying to decide which pattern to wear. Across the workshop, the phonograph spun into a fury. The horn shivered. I felt the room gather itself, like a hand turning into a fist. I remembered the rules. Shade the mirror at night, and realized the mirror over the sink upstairs had not been shaded. A stupid, mortal detail. I ran, bleeding, up the stairs so fast the banister burned my palm. In the flat, the mirror shone like a window into a lighter, stingier world. My reflection was wrong by a small degree, the tilt of the head that suggests sleep or death. I saw, on the counter beside the basin, things that had not been there before. A red ribbon, a pearl-headed pin, a small brass stand like a cuff. The stand was the right size for a wrist. "Hold still," said a voice behind me. I spun. The man from the doorway stood, no reflection this time, rinsed of color, an outline cut from ash. His eyes were holes where you could see a shop through him. "You're Verbeek," I said, and my voice threw itself against the wall. "Names are pattern," he said. "Pattern is promise. Promise keeps the face from slipping." He gestured to the ribbon, to the stand, to me. I dropped the seam ripper into the sink, where it clanged like a tiny church. "You can't have my name," I said. "You can't have me." "Already have," he said with the practical satisfaction of a clerk stamping an invoice. "3 nights you counted, you catalogued, you cared. Your attention is the thread. You did not shade the mirror." Rage rose like a fever. The ribbon looked like it would taste sweet and poison at once. In the workroom below, something clicked and began to walk. Small feet, many of them, learning the floor. I had one good tool and one failing body. I picked up the seam ripper with my blood-slick hand and drove it into the mirror's corner, dragging down hard. Glass screamed. A silvered wound opened, and the room staggered. The figure of Verbeek blurred more, and then resolved as he stepped closer, becoming unavoidable. He reached, slow and careful, as if I were a very expensive doll and he was the only one who knew how to hold me. I let him get just near enough to be certain of what would hurt him. Then I slipped under his arm, lurched down the stairs, and took the path my blood drops had already plotted for me, to the ledger. Paper, ink, pattern, promise. I flipped to the page where my name had been written. I put the seam ripper's point to the first letter of Nora, and pried, as if letters were stitches, as if ink could peel. It did not, but the page bled. Black wept into the paper, pooling like oil, and I understood. The page wouldn't let me go, but the page could be made to drown. I seized the ink bottle, sloshed it, upended it like a slaughterhouse. Liquid glossed the paper, soaked, spread. The letters pleased D and wriggled, and then collapsed, their bones gone soft. Behind me, the phonograph roared. No longer words, only static, and the bell rang all at once, a seizure of sound. The room's temperature dropped. The girls in the cabinet fogged their own glass. Verbeek's shape arrived at the edge of my vision and blurred the distance, like he did not care for space. I turned with the seam ripper and met him in the center of the room. We didn't touch. There was nothing to touch. But when I drove the ripper through the place where his hand would have been and into the ribbon on the counter, pinning it through itself into the wood, the whole shop exhaled the way a person does when a name is finally remembered. The ribbon darkened, clotted. The pearl-headed pin cracked. The phonograph died mid-breath. The bell fell silent, not even an echo to mark it. Verbeek's outline loosened, shook like dust out of a tapestry. He had no expression. How could he? And yet the room adopted one, a slow, disappointed sorrow you might see in an old teacher when a student throws away a violin. He lifted his ash shoulders and let them fall. Then he was only shadow. Then even that left. I did not leave at once. Sound returns to a room in stages, like people creeping back in after a fire. My heart's engines wound down. I wrapped my wrist with a torn dishcloth and sat on the floor among the record of my fear. Hair braid, ribbon, pearl pin, my blood like wax drips. Outside the rain had ended. A gull made a cruel joke of a cry. I laughed back, a horrible, relieved sound. Before dusk I packed. I did it calmly, the way people pack when their house is burning, carrying out mostly the things they cannot carry. The museum offered me a dormitory room on short notice. I took it because the ordinary is precious after you have lived under a rule. I slept that night without bells. In the morning I took a shower and stared for a long time at my wrist. The ring marks had faded. Almost. If you looked, really looked, something red and thin remained beneath the skin, an indentation with the stubbornness of an old promise. A week passed. The plant revived. The tram bells were just tram bells again. On the 8th day, as I walked to the museum, a shop window caught my eye in the watery light. A children's boutique had arranged a display of toys, a wooden train, a hare with mechanical lids, a new-made porcelain doll with eyes too blue to be friendly. Around the doll's wrist was a narrow red ribbon. It was just a mass-market thing. A piece of brand styling, those were the words for it. I stood on the sidewalk long enough to watch my reflection in the glass slow its breathing. Then I kept going, because going is a way to live. That night, in the dormitory room, I woke to the sound of a small bell. It could have been anything, a phone notification, the wind knocking something into something else, the radiator settling. I lay very still and counted. 1, 2, 3. My heart tried on the roll of a hare's. 4, 5, 6. If there was a 7th, it was a sound too thin to carry into the waking world. I didn't hear it. I lay there a long time anyway, watching the dark stain the room into the shape of itself. In the morning, the mirror above the sink held my face correctly. I shaded it with a towel, not because I believe in rules, but because it felt good to choose my own. Occasionally, walking past the canal, I think I hear a treadle begin and stop. Sometimes a child passes with a neat red ribbon at her wrist, and I have to put my hands in my pockets. I tell myself stories. I tell myself the ledger drowned, the pattern broke, the promise unstitched. I tell myself I am no one's likeness. But sometimes, just beneath the skin at the base of my palm, something glances against the bone the way a thread glances a needle's eye. It's nothing. It will be nothing. If you do not look, it is nothing. I do not count bells anymore, except at night, when the room is quiet and old buildings speak. When a sound slips under the door like a ribbon sliding along a hem, then I say my name, my own name, to myself and out loud into the dark, a knot I tie with breath so the face doesn't slip. And somewhere not far enough away, something waits with a pin and a patience older than glass, listening for the last stitch. I didn't believe in the rules, only the pattern, the way people whisper a story with the same stubborn contour across neighborhoods, languages, years. The elevator game is one of those stories that refuses to die. Press the floors in a sequence. Don't look at the woman who gets on. Don't answer if she speaks. And when the doors open at 10, step into a world that isn't ours. A superstition, dressed up as instructions. I told myself that when I stepped into the DeWitt building just before midnight. The tower had been empty for years, a dark chess piece amid lower brick buildings that leaned away from it like it had a magnetic repulsion. On the front steps, someone had taped a weather-stippled flyer. "Have you seen me?" A girl with a shy smile and a straight fringe, the photo yellowed by rain. The date at the bottom was 2 years ago. Her name was Lena. She vanished after telling a friend on a voice note she was going to try something in the old building because her brother swore it worked. That's how the story had found me. A thread on a message board, then a cousin of a cousin who knew the family. I make a living gathering broken edges of rumors and fitting them into episodes. I wanted the sound of the empty hallways, the hum of old wiring, the way an elevator breathes when it thinks no one's listening. I wanted to record a superstition until it ran out of air. Inside, the foyer smelled like cold dust and old pennies. My flashlight pulled pale strips off the terrazzo floor, exposing the trails of dead moths and a length of red caution tape trampled into silence. The desk stood where it always does, a waist-high wall between the lobby and the elevator bank, the glass partition smeared with years of hands. A calendar still hung behind it, fossilized at June. I switched off my flashlight to listen, and the darkness softened into shapes, the pillars, the mail slots, the suggestion of depth behind the elevator doors. I unpacked carefully. Recorder, spare batteries, a thermos of coffee that tasted like burnt paper. I thumbed the elevator call button. The plastic dome over the light was cracked. My finger sank a little and then sprang back. Somewhere above me, relays clicked like metal crickets. The cable hummed through the shaft, a low note that you only notice if you've been awake too long. The doors parted with the politeness of a yawn. Inside, it smelled of machine coolant and cold rubber. The floor was a black diamond pattern, scuffed in circles where impatient shoes had turned. Someone had scratched hearts and initials into the metal side rail. A safety inspection certificate hung crooked behind the wire-reinforced glass, the date stamped in blunt typeface, 2010. I set the recorder on the floor and watched its red eye fix me. The elevator panel had the old numbers, white text in black buttons, a couple with half moons missing where a fingernail had worried them down. There was no 13. There never is. I laid my fingers on 4 to feel the depression. Cold, smooth, a little sticky at the rim. When I pressed it, the number blinked in the panel above and the doors slid shut. I whispered into the recorder what I was doing, the way I always do, more to keep my own mind tethered than anything. Sequence, I said. 4. I punched the button. The elevator took breath. For the first several floors it was ordinary. The slow tug, the faint drift of my stomach downward, the cable singing in a high wire note. The doors opened on 4 to a hallway lit by the pale dirge of failing fluorescence. Dust blossomed where my flashlight beam swept. Closed doors, more closed doors, a door propped open by the skeleton of a filing cabinet. No footsteps, no echo. I told the recorder as much and pressed 2. Back down. Doors open. A corridor repeating itself like I was looking at the same floor through a misaligned mirror. I caught the faintest movement at the edge of the glass panel inset in the doors. Only it wasn't a reflection because my body didn't move that way. I leaned closer. Just my own grainy face in the wire mesh, a trick of the light. 6, I said to the room, and the room obeyed. When the doors opened on 6, a smell like pooled rain drifted in, cool and metallic. Somewhere far down the hallway, a door was gently bumping against its frame, the wind trapped in the building's lungs. I stood where I was. I didn't want to step out, not yet. I pressed 2 again, and the doors whispered together as if to say, "That's right, back you go." If you've ever stayed awake for 30 hours on an edit, you know how your brain starts offering pennies under the lens of your vision. Flickers, little sliding shadows that right themselves when you focus. At 2, I thought I saw fingers curl around the edge of a taped-up office directory. When I fixed my gaze, the paper lay flat. I pressed 10. The elevator hesitated in a way machines hesitate when they're almost polite, like it's asking if you're sure. I pressed harder, a childish insistence. The carriage rose. At 5, the doors opened even though I hadn't asked them to. I knew the story. You're not supposed to look if someone gets on at 5. You're not supposed to speak. It's the part that keeps the game anchored in your mind, a not looking that feels like looking with your whole body. I kept my eyes on the brass trim around the buttons. I tried to turn my face into a concept, an absence, a wall. I heard the shift of weight as someone stepped over the threshold, a scuff, a small scrape, the whisper of fabric with the weight of wetness in it. The smell that came in on her, because it was her, it had to be, was water ended badly. Elevator pit water, stairwell water, water that had forgotten how to be clean. She moved to the back left corner, I think. You can tell by the way the air changes near your shoulder blade when a person occupies it. I pressed 1 because that's what you're supposed to do, the test. If the elevator descends, you've wasted your time. If it rises, you keep going. I held my breath. The elevator coughed. The floor indicator blinked like an eye trying to clear grit. 10. The carriage continued to rise. I let out my breath, and it sounded too loud. I told the recorder with a dry voice, "We're ascending," as if I were the first to report it from the field. Behind me, the person shifted. It was a small movement, but it carried the weight of a decision. "Do you have a key?" The voice was soft enough to be mistaken for an air current. It wasn't a question I'd expected. It wasn't the classic line, "Where are you going? Where are you from?" But it had the unadorned oddness of a question you might answer without thinking. I didn't. I didn't say anything, and I didn't look. I stared at the seam between the elevator doors, at the thin black promise that they would open. "Lena left hers," the voice said, as if talking to the seam with me. "She left it in the crack where the door meets the floor." My hand slid to my pocket, and the keys there became a living thing, sharp teeth against my thumb. The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto 10 in a world that felt like a picture of itself. The hallway stretched ahead like a throat. Every office door was ajar by the same 4 centimeters, and the lights glowed with a pale, perpetual late afternoon that had never met a sun. No exit signs, no glowing red stairs, no fire extinguishers in glass, just that gentle wind that comes from nowhere and never stops, carrying the smell of copier toner and old carpet. Behind me, the woman didn't move. I could feel her watching without looking. It would have been easy to stay, to press 1 again, to close the doors, to pretend I had a bottom to drop toward. But the story I was chasing existed on the other side of those doors, and it pressed against my ribs like a restless animal. I stepped out. The carpet dampened the sound of my steps in a way my recording would later insist did not exist. The hallway narrowed the further I walked. The office names were still there, applied in gold vinyl letters, but when I tried to read them, they rearranged into a broken crossword. I breathed shallowly because I didn't want to inhale this place too deeply. From behind me, the elevator doors remained obligingly open. "Lena?" I called, because I am not a brave person, only a curious one, and calling names is a way to make your own fear look like a task. My voice didn't echo, it went out as if underwater. A light flickered at the far end of the hall, and then stabilized. "Here," said a voice that was not the elevator woman's. It was lighter, with a stage whisper quality, the kind of voice you use when you're hiding behind a couch to surprise someone. I followed it. The office at the end had a glass wall and a door propped with a plastic wastebasket. Inside, a corkboard hosted a collage of detritus, index cards, receipts, the clipped-out photograph of a cake. On the desk lay a key fob on a blue ribbon. The fob was stamped with the DeWitt Building's crest, an ornate D inside a clover. The ribbon had a crease where someone had bitten it. I didn't touch it. I looked at the glass wall and saw not myself but the elevator interior. Empty. Doors still open. The recorder's red light a tiny bead. For the first time, I looked away from the wall to the elevator itself and flinched when I understood. I could see it not as a reflection, but as if the glass were a hole through which I was watching a room I had just left. The angle was wrong for a reflection. The way the light lay on the floor was wrong. "Take it," said the voice behind me, but closer now. I turned. The hallway was empty. The elevator stood at the end like a square mouth waiting. This is the thing about rules. They exist to shape your fear into a manageable animal. Don't look. Don't speak. Don't pick up what isn't yours. The game's rules were simple, and I was already breaking them every way it counted. I picked up the key. The blue ribbon was damp and left a line across my palm. I slid the metal fob into my pocket. The hallway exhaled like the building had been waiting for that. The door to the stairwell at the far end clicked open by itself. It was a familiar door, painted the same dull red as every emergency exit door in every office building, and I knew in my bones it led to nothing I could survive. I walked back to the elevator. My footsteps were louder, like the carpet had hardened behind me. On the threshold I hesitated, because hesitation felt like a tribute to common sense. If I crossed back, I knew some doors don't open the same way twice. If I stayed, I would peel apart, curiosity a wind at my seams. I stepped in. The air wrapped around me like a compress. The woman, she was still in the back left corner, where I had not looked. I could feel the shadow of her face on the side of my neck, the way you can tell which window a fire engine's light comes through, even with your eyes closed. I pressed 1. We didn't move. From somewhere overhead, a relay clicked and failed. The indicator stayed on 10. The sound of the cable above shifted into a tight, strained whine. "I think you have something of mine," the woman said. Her voice was child-soft but too measured, like she had spent a long time pretending to be calm. "He gave me the rules and didn't tell me there was a cost. Do you understand costs?" I pressed closed door even though they were already closed. I pressed 1 again. The button lit but did not comfort. "You're not supposed to answer," I said, and immediately regretted that I had spoken because my throat felt raw in the sentence's wake. The air in the elevator dropped a few degrees, cold lightning that furred my skin. "You answered," she said, and sounded relieved. "So now we can trade." I reached up and punched 5 because the number had become a superstition in the span of a heartbeat. The lights in the elevator dimmed and rose, dimmed and rose. The floor indicator sputtered, tried on B for a flicker, then returned to 10 like it had only been kidding. "You have choices," she said, "but not here." The emergency phone was behind a small brass door with a knurled handle. I flipped it open and lifted the receiver. No dial tone. Only the kind of static you get from an old TV tuned between stations. A thick, living hush that makes you imagine you can hear your own brain. "Hello?" I said into it, and my voice came back from the speaker above the door, distorted, milliseconds delayed, like the elevator was trying on my shape. On the other end of the static, something shifted. A set of footsteps ran down a distant hallway and stopped abruptly, a child's footsteps. I looked at the gap between the elevator doors, the black seam, and I could have sworn I saw a small shadow lean into it and then dart away, as if peeking through a keyhole from the wrong side. "Lena," I said, because saying her name was another kind of superstition, something to throw like a rope. "Is this you?" Silence. And then from the speaker a whispering voice not like either I had heard, more breath than word. "She won't let you go with your name." The elevator shuddered. The cable sang. The sensation of weight returned in a quick skim down my legs as if we were falling half a floor. The indicator blinked to 9 and then immediately back to 10. I pressed every button. The panel lit up like a small city. The elevator ignored me. Behind me, the woman took one step forward and stopped when I stopped breathing. "You shouldn't have taken it," she said. "Mine was here. I had to leave something to mark the seam." The key. My hand clenched around it in my pocket. I pulled it out and it felt heavier, as if the metal had taken on water. The blue ribbon dripped onto the patterned rubber, a dark constellation floorward. "Give it back," she said, soft, almost tender, "or I'll ride with you until there's nothing left to ride." I turned. Her face was ordinary and awful. The way a drowned person is awful, not because of wounds, but because the skin keeps the shape of a life without its warmth. Her hair lay like wet rope on her shoulders. Her eyes were patient, very patient, because patience grows when you have no clocks. The badge clipped to the front of her sweatshirt was a photo of her own face in a younger year, the "Have you seen me" picture, only reversed, the letters backwards like a mirror. "Please," she said. I don't know if it was the please or the way the ribbon on the key left blue on my skin like a circle drawn in pen. I don't know if I believed I was rescuing someone or simply terrified enough to grope for any lever. I tossed the key toward the threshold. It struck the seam and disappeared. Not fell. Disappeared, like a magician's coin slipping into a palm that wasn't there. The sound it made was a skitter, not of metal on rubber, but of something skinny and eager catching a treat. The elevator breathed in. I felt it pull at my shirt sleeves, at the little hairs on my arms, like a lung filling with me. The indicator, coy, considered, and then confidently descended to 1. We moved. I felt us moving, the honest, boring translation of height into hunger into height again. The light stayed steady. The hum of the cable took on a workaday music. My knees loosened in gratitude that felt like weeping. When the doors opened, I didn't look to see if she was still there. I shot out into the lobby. The calendar behind the security desk didn't say June anymore. The month was October, and the year was wrong. Not by much, only a number that made my mouth go dry. The flyer on the front door had changed too. The weather had happened other photos. A boy with a curly fringe I didn't recognize, a track of dates, a phone number with an area code that wasn't there before. But there, taped messily over another leaf, was a new flyer. "Have you seen me?" It was my face, grimacing because the original photo had caught me mid-blink. The date was yesterday. I told myself that it was a prank. That someone was messing with me because they knew I'd come. The DeWitt building had neighbors. Somebody could have slipped in, taped a doctored flyer as a joke. I said that out loud to the empty lobby. The words had the strange, nutritionless mouthfeel of a lie that hasn't decided yet whether it believes itself. My recorder was still in the elevator. I realized it a second after the doors closed. The indicator listed up to 3 of its own accord. I hit the call button. The light did not respond. The elevator had decided to consider my contribution a tip. Behind the desk, the landline handset sat on its cradle, innocent. I picked it up. Dial tone, real and mild. I dialed the number on the flyer. It rang once, and then picked up with the loud, panicked intake of a person who has been falling asleep next to their phone for a long time. "Hello?" A woman's voice. Not the one from the elevator. Not the whisper. A real voice with a tremble to it like the end of a violin note. "Hi," I said stupidly, because what can you say to yourself? "I think there's been a mistake. There's a flyer." "Where are you?" she asked, not hearing me, or hearing only what she had prepared to hear. "Please, where are you?" They said not to get my hopes up, but the voice said to answer any call that came from an unknown number after midnight. She started to cry. Not loud, not gushing, only that compression of breath that turns into water almost against your will. "Please tell me where you are." By the time I worked enough words into a shape to try to be kind, the line clicked dead. I had the impression that something at the other end had said that's enough and taken the phone away from her. I stepped outside because outside felt like the opposite of whatever the elevator was. The night air was warmer than the lobby, as if the building had been hoarding a winter all its own. The street looked ordinary. The cafe across the way, boarded in my memory, had a new name I did not recognize and chairs stacked neatly, as if opening hours were capable of returning. My car waited where I'd left it. When I unlocked it, the engine started on the first try. Driving home was the most terrifying part because every light changed at the right time. The radio worked. The GPS located me on a map that asserted the DeWitt building still stood at the corner of a street that had quietly renamed itself. The ordinary world performed so adequately, I wanted to scream at it for its confidence. In my apartment, my spare key hung on its hook just where I always leave it. The blue ribbon key wasn't in my pocket anymore, but the skin there retained a chill as if it had lain on ice. I slept with the bathroom light on. The bulb hummed, and my brain attached words to it to keep from thinking about other hums. In the morning, I checked my podcast email. A dozen messages I recognized, a couple new business inquiries, and one with a subject line that turned my mouth into paper. Please, we think this is you. It was from an account made only for this purpose, the kind of ghost you make when your real mailbox can't bear any more. The email contained a photo attachment, my flyer, taped to the DeWitt's door. The date was visible at the bottom, my name spelled correctly, my picture pulled from a headshot I'd posted 3 years ago for a conference that had never happened because the world went quiet that spring. The email's body read, "If this is you, please answer. If this is you, don't go back. If this is you, then you're not you anymore." I didn't answer. I walked to the sink and turned on the tap to witness a real liquid move from a real spout and stutter over a real plate. I touched my face to feel the unglamorous fact of skin. I breathed in my apartment's smells, coffee grounds, laundry detergent, the damp leaf smell that sneaks in when your neighbors overwater their plants. I listened. At first I thought it was the refrigerator cycling. Then I thought it was the neighbor's air conditioning. A hum, low and patient, the electrical purr of life. But as I moved through the apartment, the hum tracked with me. When I stood still, it sounded above me. When I walked, it receded and returned. In the hallway, it grew stronger. At my front door, it gathered into a particular note, a thin song sung by a taut cable. Through the peephole, the corridor outside my apartment was empty. At the far end, the elevator doors were closed, their seam a single black line. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a voice message from an unknown number. I didn't press play. Later, washing a cup, I pressed the screen by accident, and the recording began. A small intake of breath filled my apartment, the kind a person makes when the doors open and she sees someone she's been waiting for. "Do you have a key?" The voice asked me, kind, inexorable, exactly patient enough to last a whole life. "You answered before. We only need to finish the trade." I didn't believe in the rules once. Now I carry them around like rosary beads. I don't know how to pray. I take the stairs, even when my knees hurt. I leave the bathroom fan running to cover the sound of the cable's song. I delete voicemails without listening, until sometimes I listen just to be certain I'm not already inside the file. I do not go near buildings with more than 3 floors. Some nights, though, the hum tucks itself under the floorboards and sings up through the soles of my feet. On those nights, I dream the elevator stopping on 5, the doors opening to a woman who looks like a picture that got wet and dried wrong. I keep my eyes on the buttons. I feel the gravity change as someone steps in beside me. I smell the water that has forgotten itself. In the morning, there is a new email, a subject line like a question mark forced to be polite, a photo attached of a flyer curling in damp wind. The date is always yesterday. The face is always mine. I tell myself the end of the story is that I got out. I tell myself that if I were a ghost, I wouldn't be able to feel the cheap loveliness of sun on a clean mug or the small joy of a song I haven't heard in years. I tell myself whatever will keep me out of the DeWitt, because the doors will open if I go, and the hum will recognize me, and the woman will be patient, and I don't know what happens if patience runs out. Sometimes, in the grocery store, I'll see a girl with a straight fringe and a sweatshirt, and the urge is so strong I have to grip the handle of my cart with both hands. I want to ask her if she remembers the rule about not looking. I want to ask her if, when she finally looked, what she saw was herself. Tonight, the hallway outside my apartment is quiet. The elevator waits behind its seam. I set my keys on the hook, the metal ticking against the wall like a tiny metronome too slow for any song. Through the plaster, I hear the building moving itself, a ventilation duct settling, a neighbor setting down a jug of detergent, and beneath them the very old, very patient music of a cable humming to keep a box at rest between the floors where it can listen. I tell myself that if I am missing, it is only on paper. I tell myself that if I am not me, at least I am still here to say it. And when the phone vibrates at my hip again and the screen says unknown, I let it ring the whole way through, because there are some calls you only get to refuse once, and some doors that, if you hold them open, never close. Somewhere across town, the DeWitt building breathes in. Somewhere, a new flyer curls at its edges and waits for a face. Somewhere, an elevator stops at 5, the doors sliding open onto a woman who asks the simplest question in the world and waits for it to be answered. When I moved into the apartment on Crenshaw Avenue, the hallway smelled like fresh paint and hot dust, as if the building were trying to cover its age with a single, hurried layer. The landlady, Mrs. Halpern, a woman with a crescent of lipstick on her front tooth, handed me a jangling ring of keys and said, "Quiet building, good bones." She said it twice while I signed the lease over the hood of her car. The rent was cheap, the light from the bay window was generous, and the bedroom closet was deep enough to misplace whole winters. 2 bedrooms, the listing had said. 1 available, roommate recently deceased. I'd assumed that meant the second bedroom sat empty, waiting for a new stranger. I misunderstood. The apartment had the hush of a museum late in the day. Everything was too still. My shoes ticked on the wooden floor, and the ticks echoed down the hallway as if something were counting them. I carried up the boxes in 3 trips, sweating through my shirt and the early autumn sunlight, and left them stacked by the kitchen. The previous tenant's room, the deceased roommate, was closed with a strip of blue painter's tape across the doorframe. Someone had written Micah's room on the tape in ballpoint pen. The handwriting slanted like it was pulling away from the word or pulling toward it. "Was he your friend?" I asked, because silence begged for noise. I was the only one home. Still, the apartment answered in small ways. Pipes shrank in their sleeves, a neighbor's radio murmured through a vent, the refrigerator sighed in relief and then changed its mind. By evening the light had turned a color like pale tea, warm and weak. I made the first of many decisions, to leave Micah's door closed, not out of respect exactly, more like superstition, the way you avoid stepping on the cracks when no one is watching. I ate dinner cross-legged on the floor, cold noodles from a grocer who never smiled, and listened to the building. Someone walked past above me. The steps went from the living room to the kitchen ceiling and back again, slow and deliberate, as if measuring something. The cadence made me think of a metronome and a heartbeat. I counted them. 12, then silence. When the quiet came back, it felt heavier, like a blanket damp in a cold room. I went to bed early to make the day release me, stapled to my bones by travel and nerves. My purchased thrift store mattress was stiffer than I remembered in the store. I pulled the chain on the bedside lamp and the dark came down all at once. The chain clicked against the ceramic base, a little note of punctuation announcing the end of sense. Sleep didn't arrive. It stood in the doorway, making up its mind. Small sounds lifted inside the walls. Pipes, yes. The building settling, sure. The whisper of wind against the old sash windows, of course. But then something else. Barely there footfalls in the hallway. Not the weighted heel-first stomp of the upstairs walker. These were close and damped, carrying the suggestion of a socked foot turning the corner of a rug, a cautious body negotiating the night. I held my breath. They paused outside my door. The shadow under the door brightened and dimmed, as if someone on the other side had turned a phone face up and then put it in a pocket. The hall light, I hadn't touched it. I waited for a knock that did not come. Only an impression, a pressure, the sense of being regarded by a patience that wasn't quite human. Eventually the footfalls retreated. The refrigerator hummed itself to sleep. My thoughts, freed from observation, jellied into dreams. In the morning the apartment looked ordinary enough to make me embarrassed for myself. Dusty sunlight drifted through the blinds. The wood floor showed a record of previous lives. Grooves and tiny gouges, dark water halos, a glitter of someone's dropped earring stuck between boards. I made coffee until the kitchen smelled like a memory of a cafe. Steam feathered the edges of the window above the sink, and for a moment I saw letters forming there, a curve becoming an M, then fading into nothing. I set the mug next to the sink. When I reached for it a minute later, it had shifted 2 inches to the left. I stared at the ring it left and told myself I must have bumped the counter. I put the mug back on the ring. turned to open a drawer, turned back. The mug had rotated, the handle now pointing toward me, an invitation. "Thanks," I said, without thinking. It didn't happen all at once. The strange things arrived politely, as if tapping at the door of my attention, equally willing to leave if asked. A teaspoon placed carefully on the edge of the sink like a cat poised before a leap. The kitchen light flickering once when I said Micah's name aloud. The kettle turning itself on at 2:17 a.m., 3 nights in a row, filling the apartment with a low, restful breath like a sleeping animal. The smell of laundry detergent in the hallway when I hadn't done any laundry. A thin indented line on the couch cushion, as if someone had sat there, elbows on knees, concentrating. On the 4th night I woke to a soft clatter. The house had learned the exact pitch to pluck my nerves. I had tuned to it. From my bed I could see the ribbon of light under my door. It was darker now, the hall light off. I lay still and listened. Someone moved in the kitchen, cautious but unafraid, familiar with the space in a way I wasn't yet. A cabinet opened and closed. A drawer slid. I stood. The floor was cold, and the air had the thinness of 3 a.m. when thoughts are old and delicate. I opened my door to the dark hallway and the still shape of the taped door across from me. Micah's room, shivering at the edges in the draft. "Hello," I said. The apartment paused. The refrigerator stopped mid-breath. Even the city outside had the decency to quiet. The kettle clicked. Not the mechanical, impatient click of a switch, but something else. Like someone tapping their fingernail once to let me know I was seen. "You can share the kitchen," I said absurdly. "Just don't break things." The cupboard door nearest me opened a hand's width. Inside, a tidy row of glasses caught the thin light and offered it back in narrow, careful strips. I took a glass and left it on the counter. The kettle clicked again and eased into a hum. The room warmed. I didn't sleep after that. I stood in the archway and drank water and thought about routines. How a life is braided from them. How the braid remains for a long time after the hair is cut. When people die, they don't evacuate. That's what I decided. Their schedules keep their shape. Their habits move like wind through a field that remembers the direction of yesterday's weather. Micah's room, with its taped door, had the sticky gravity of a closed book everyone has read. I began to walk a little softer in the hallway, to leave the bathroom fan off, to let the kettle choose its hour without comment. At the laundromat down the block, I asked the attendant if he knew anything about Micah. "Everybody knows something," he said, counting quarters. "Slipped on the back stairs is what the official is. But there was talk of fights. There was talk of a break-in. There's always talk." He looked at me a moment longer than casual conversation requires. "You're in 2B, yeah? You should change the chain on your door." "Why?" he shrugged. "Because people who aren't you have keys." When I came home, the chain was already on my door. I didn't remember setting it. It slid free when my key turned, as if it had been waiting for me to arrive so it could relax its guard. I stood in the doorway and smelled detergent and coffee and a faint trace of something medicinal, like antiseptic or the interior of a bandage. My stomach did a small, lazy roll. I locked the deadbolt. I clicked the chain. I listened. Micah was home. Not as a shape, not as a face, as a pattern. The kettle cut on at 2:17 a.m., and at 7:02 the radio in my phone, why had it opened, started playing a song I didn't know, an old, twangy thing about train tracks and leaving town, though my music library doesn't contain that kind of music. I Googled later. The song was Silver Dagger. I lay very still, phone on my chest, the ceiling just visible above me, and felt the presence of someone inclined toward melancholy. It was oddly companionable. The apartment accepted me as an additional rhythm. I washed dishes to the soft chuff of someone using the bathroom sink at the same time. I read on the couch with the sense of another reader turning a page every few minutes over my shoulder. I worked remote at my tiny table beside the window and scrolled my emails with an unnerving awareness of an unfelt draft moving the hair on my forearms. Small scares punctuated the calm, like commas. A door closing when I was certain I'd left it ajar. The shower curtain billowing toward me when there was no air moving. The whisper of my name when I was between waking and sleep, the gentle way a lover might say it, or a parent is supposed to. On a damp Thursday, I broke my rule and peeled the tape off Micah's door. The door didn't resist, but it didn't help me either. The room smelled like dust and something sweet that had turned. Not rot, not exactly, like a bowl of fruit left too long in sunlight. The blinds were closed. The bed was made with hospital corners. There was a cup on the desk that contained 3 coins and a pin shaped like a red balloon. On the floor beside the bed sat a shoebox with black marker writing on the lid. Lists. I opened it. Inside were index cards, each with a list in that same skidding hand. Tuesday, wake, kettle, shower, shirt you like, take trash, text mom, music, work, lunch, soup, stop by co-op, call M if energy. Friday, wash sheets, buy detergent, windows, write, check locks twice. The words were domestic and private and shot through with an unexpected tenderness. The lists often ended with sleep, try. I didn't mean to take any of it, but my hand closed around one of the cards, the Friday one. I put it in my back pocket. When I looked up, the blinds were open. I hadn't heard them move. Light lay in white ladders on the bed. I'm sorry, I said. I shouldn't have. The door behind me swung shut, not slamming but closing decisively. All the tiny hairs along my neck lifted. The air pressed itself against my skin, and then, slowly, the feeling passed, leaving behind the smell of detergent like a truce flag. The first unambiguous message appeared halfway through a shower that night. I had been careful not to fog the mirror too thick, conscious of the ridiculousness of my new kindnesses, when letters began to draw themselves from the steam as if someone had pressed a wet finger across the glass. He watches. I stepped out of the shower dripping and bare and suddenly bone cold, my hands leaving panic prints on the sink. Water ran off my elbows and pattered on the bath mat. I wiped the mirror with my forearm. The words blurred, then sharpened again. He watches. Who? My voice was paper dry. The lights flickered, just the once. The word H-O arrived in the fog under my question as if mocking me. And then, as if the room itself was exhausted by its own drama, the steam dissipated and the message went with it. I wrapped a towel around myself and stood listening to the apartment. Through the wall, someone turned a key. A door on the stairwell opened and closed. Footsteps went past my landing and went up, up, up. The chain on my front door was engaged. I checked twice. I laid the Friday index card on the kitchen table like a talisman. Under it I placed a sticky note from my desk and a pen. Who watches? I wrote with a shaking hand. How do I see? When I woke at 2:17 to the kettle clicking on, there was an answer in small, precise script below my note. Eye in the wall. I stared at those 4 words for a long time and felt something old in me rearrange. A vent sat high on the wall in the hall, a bland grid of dust-catching metal that I had stopped seeing the first day I arrived. I dragged a chair under it and climbed with foolish, trembling bravado. Up close, the screws looked hand-turned rather than machine-tight. I twisted one. It came away easily, chalking my fingertips with old paint. Behind the cover was darkness and dust and the smell of mouse nests and insulation, and a small black lens, centered like a pupil, pointed straight at my bedroom door. My stomach turned hot and then cold. My brain sent an instruction to my body, and my body refused it. For a second, I could not move. The lens made a tiny clockwork noise as it adjusted. When I was a child, I learned that your real life is the one that persists after you're done telling the story about it. The version your body believes. Mine believed, in that moment, that there was a watchful presence beyond the wall. Not Micah, a living person. The landlady owned the building. She had other units. She had lived here longer than anyone. She had keys. But I kept seeing the laundromat attendant counting quarters and the length of his look, the way he said, people have keys who aren't you. And then a face swam up from the soup of the building's traffic. The older man with the dimpled jaw who brought grocery bags up for Mrs. Halpern twice a week, who had offered to change my light bulbs sometime when you're around, whose cologne pooled in the stairwell like a murky lake. The kettle finished its little monologue in the kitchen. The radio on my phone launched Silver Dagger again, uninvited. The sound was an anchor. I stepped down, hands shaking, and dialed the non-emergency line, then hung up when the automated voice asked for the reason. I wasn't ready to pour my paranoia into a stranger's ear. Not yet. The galling thing about being afraid is how reasonable you sound when you're telling yourself to ignore it. I wrote on the sticky note, "Thank you." When I turned back to the counter, an additional line had appeared beneath my thank you in two pale strokes of the pen. Check locks twice. I slept in my clothes, on top of the covers. I dreamed of a narrow staircase and the soft thud of a body failing to catch itself, the way sound moves through wood like it's traveling on its knees. I stayed home the next day and pretended to work. Every time the hallway quieted, I thought of the silent lens staring out of its dust. Around noon, someone tried my door. The knob turned once, twice, and then the chain stopped the movement with a flat metallic complaint. There was a pause. The knob turned again as if out of politeness. Then footsteps retreated down the hall. "He watches?" I whispered into the quiet, and my voice cracked. At 6:10 p.m., as the late light turned the kitchen gold, and the street outside swelled with the sound of people returning to their lives, the front doorknob turned one more time. The chain was not engaged. I had taken it off to bring in a package, then gotten distracted by an email. Then the kettle had clicked at 2:17 in my head, even though it wasn't 2:17, and I had forgotten. The door opened. The man with the dimpled jaw stepped in, his grocery bag strap cutting into his fingers, a long, apologetic smile already forming. "Hey," he said, as if he had knocked and I had answered. His eyes flicked left and right, registering the couch, the rug, the single lamp, the sink full of 2 plates. "Mrs. Halpern sent me to check your smoke detector. She said you'd be home." "No, my throat closed around the word. He walked past me like water moving past a stone. In that instant, a cold blew from the hallway like a winter window opening. The kitchen light flared once, twice, then thrummed back to a low, watchful brightness. The kettle clicked on without my hand. Steam began to spit into the room, too fast, as if the water were boiling harder than the dial allowed. The man looked up at the sound. His eyes clicked into a different gear. "You've been poking around," he said to the room, not to me. "That's not respectful, you know." He set the grocery bag on the counter with a thud and reached into his jacket. Something metallic winked and then was gone into his palm. "I'll scream," I said, and the sentence felt like a line from a play I was poorly cast in. He took a step toward me. His expression had settled into something like mild pity, the face you make for a child who's insistent and wrong. The bathroom door slammed by itself, hard enough to make the mirror rattle in its frame. The man flinched. When he turned his head toward the sound, the kettle leapt off its base and flung itself, spitting and shrieking, across the counter. Boiling water cascaded over the edge like a small waterfall and splashed his wrist. He dropped whatever he held with an involuntary shout. It was a little black box with a red light that pulsed once and then died. I used the second he gave me. I lunged for the door. It swung shut in my face. No, it was pushed shut. From the inside. The air in the hallway had weight again, intention, and I felt Micah's presence not as a chill this time, but as a pressure that moved through the apartment like a tide. The living room lamp flicked off, and then on, and then off again, and when it came back, the man stood with his back to the wall, his eyes wide in the sudden dark. "Get out," I said to him, and my voice sounded like 3 voices braided together. My own, the one that exists when adrenaline owns the body, and a third one, quiet, worn at the edges, the color of late afternoon. He swore and reached down to scoop up the black device. A drawer slammed in the kitchen without hands. The window shades snapped to attention. The refrigerator's motor surged and held, a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. The apartment was weaponizing itself. The man bolted for the door. It didn't open. The deadbolt turned, would not turn back. For a terrible, righteous second, I wanted it to hold him there forever. I wanted him to understand what it means to be trapped in a place that knows you and doesn't need you. Then I wanted the moment over. I wanted anything else. I grabbed the phone. My thumb shook and slid over numbers I meant to press. The call went through anyway, and I said words that poured out in no particular order. "Break-in? He's in my apartment. I don't know his name. I think he's with the landlady. There are cameras. Please, please." The man was breathing like he'd been running. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said. He sounded like he believed it. The bathroom door eased open on its own. From inside, the fan clicked on, and its hum filled the hallway with a soft machine comfort. The mirror was already fogging, even though no one had turned the shower on. Letters formed there, backwards from where I stood. The man saw them at the same time I did. He turned to the bathroom and read aloud, his voice hollow. He pushed me. He looked at me. For an instant I saw something else in his face, an emotion with edges like regret. Then it was gone. He tried the door again, and this time it opened. He left without his grocery bag, without his black device, without another word. His steps hit the stairs in an ugly rhythm and then faded. I didn't move until the sirens were already folding themselves into the street outside. After the police left, which took hours, and included 2 separate times where I explained with wild-eyed steadiness that I had not written the message on the mirror, the apartment exhaled. The kettle sat on the counter where I'd set it back, its scalded plastic handle crazed with pale lines like a thick hand of lifelines. A water ring dried on the table around the list's index card. I put the card back in Micah's shoebox with an apology I didn't speak aloud. The police were very practical. They photographed the lens in the vent and took the device the man had dropped. They promised to review the landlady's ties. They said the right things about safety. They looked at me like a person whose claim about a message in Steam belonged to shock. When they left, one of them said, "We'll be in touch," and the sentence hung between us like a string attached to no balloon. Night returned, as if none of it had happened. That's what night does. I washed the few dishes in the sink, and the water ran hot and then not, and the pipes spoke, and somewhere upstairs the metronome walker paced the length of their small evening. I dried my hands on the dish towel and went into the hallway and stood with my fingers on the tape scar where the door had once been sealed. "Thank you," I said. The bathroom mirror was clear. I stared at it until my face turned unfamiliar, and then, right before I turned away, a curve appeared on the glass, sweeping and simple. An M. Then the rest of the name, Micah. The letters were smaller than before, neater. "I won't let him back in," I said. "I'll change the locks. I'll put the chain back on, twice." A few seconds passed. Then, softly, a new word formed. Sleep. It wasn't a command, it was permission. I slept. Not well, not fully, but with the sense of a watch kept. At 2:17, the kettle clicked on and then off, as if demonstrating that it could. As if to say, we could still have our routines, that strange gentle braid that had become us. I stayed a year. The landlady sold the building and moved to Florida. The man with the dimpled jaw pleaded to something that kept him off the front page and out of prison. The new owner replaced the stairs and painted the hall and removed the vents entirely, as if decoration had been the problem. In the spring, I opened the windows and the smell of detergent got thinner, and then, one day, wasn't in the air at all. That didn't mean Micah left, not entirely. The living always assume leaving is what the dead want, but routine can be a form of love too. We adjusted. The kettle became just a kettle again, most nights. Occasionally it clicked at 2:17, and I would say into the dark, "I hear you," and something in the room would relax. The bathroom mirror stayed stubbornly ordinary, except for the morning I was late to a meeting and found the words "Friday list" under my breath on the glass, and I laughed out loud, honestly laughed, alone in a bathroom, in an apartment on a street that never could decide whether it was residential or commercial. On my last night there, boxes stacked again by the kitchen, I left the shoebox of lists on Micah's desk. The blinds were half open. Late light slashed across the bed in pale golds. I stood in the doorway and hummed a few bars of Silver Dagger, a song I still didn't much like but had learned to hold without flinching. On the bathroom mirror, as the shower ran and fog rose, the faintest curve of an M appeared and then faded before the letter was complete. Maybe it was the angle. Maybe it was me wanting it too much. In the hallway, I put my hand on the spot where blue tape had once held a door shut. I turned off the kitchen light. The refrigerator sighed. The city peeled itself into night. When I pulled the door closed behind me, the chain fell into place with a soft, practiced hush all by itself. It made the exact sound a parent might make, checking a sleeping child. A goodbye, a protection, a routine ending as gently as it began. When I first took the top floor sublet, all I cared about was quiet. The listing promised it. No upstairs neighbors, morning light through a skylight, perfect for writers. The The building itself was a narrow wedge shouldered between a bakery and a shop that sold only lamps, the kind of city block that felt like a diorama left in the sun slightly too long, warped, shiny at the edges. The stairwell smelled faintly of flour and something metallic. My unit was small but efficient. A galley kitchen, a shower curtained off like a confession booth, and a sleeping alcove under a square skylight set into the slanted ceiling. The glass was thick, pebbled on the outside, and the frame was painted shut. "You won't have roof access," the landlord, a man with a permanent jacket of drywall dust, had said as he rattled the keys. "Insurance. Fine with me," I'd answered. "I just need quiet." The first night, the quiet felt like a blanket, stiff and unfamiliar, heavy in places. I set a box fan to low and arranged my things to fit the space. Books along the baseboard, a French press by the sink, a silver-leafed plant on the windowsill that a friend swore was unkillable. Even with the fan, I could hear the bakery below clattering pans, a comfortable percussion like friendly cutlery. I fell asleep around 1. Something woke me at 3:13. The time stamped itself into my mind because the digital alarm clock across from the bed was too bright and too blue, one of those cheap ones that made every digit feel like it was burned into the room. 3:13. I blinked, trying to place the sound. It was faint, filtered through insulation and night, but it was unmistakable. Footsteps crossing the roof. Not scurrying like a raccoon, not the scatter of pigeons. Step. Step. A pause that felt deliberate. Step. Gravel compressing, tar crackling, a human cadence with weight and intention. The steps passed above me and continued along the roofline until they faded into the city's breath. Then silence. The clock still said 3:13, as if time, shocked, had decided to sit for a while. I lay there, listening for the follow-up. My mind offered reasons I could swallow. A maintenance worker, a neighbor smoking on a shared roof. It wasn't my business. And yet the roof, I had been told, was sealed. Insurance. The next day, the bakery lady downstairs slid a bag of end-of-day croissants into my hands. "First week's luck," she said. She had flour at her temple where a strand of hair had stuck. I almost asked if anyone used the roof, but the words felt silly in daylight. People used roofs. That was the nature of cities. I took my pastries home, ate one over the sink, and smirked at myself for being the kind of person who listened for ghosts. The second night, the footsteps came back. They began as a single tread, so quiet I wasn't sure I'd heard it. Then another, step, step. The cadence was too even to be an animal, too slow to be somebody in a hurry. I held my breath. There was a small gritty sound, like someone pivoting on crushed glass, and then the steps resumed, more certain, directly above the bed. A pinch of black grit fell from the corner of the skylight and landed on my pillow. "Okay," I muttered to the empty room. "Nope." In the morning I called the landlord and described what I'd heard. He laughed once, in a way that sounded like a cough wearing a costume. "Pigeons dropped things. Maybe kids got up there somehow. It's not possible. There's no access." His denial felt practiced, taped onto the end of his sentences. "Could someone be sleeping up there?" I asked. "No," he said crisply. "It's sealed. You're fine." "At 3 in the morning?" I said. He hung up. That afternoon, I went in search of proof that would make me normal again. I climbed the stairwell to the top and found a metal door labeled roof, painted the same beige as the cinder block wall. It had a heavy latch and a padlock. The edges of the door were caulked, seam over seam, like someone had tried to install a door where a door didn't belong. The padlock looked new. Fingerprints dusted the chrome. Back inside my apartment, I stood under the skylight, considering my options. The frame was old, the paint layered and cracking like ice flows. I touched it. The wood felt spongy in places. Tar smell threaded the air, faint like the ghost of a roof repair. I opened my phone and set up a recording, voice memos rolling into the night. The third night, the steps didn't wait for 3:13. They started just after 2. The sound woke me as if my body had learned it already, a secret knock. Through the skylight, the ceiling took on a grainy glow. The steps tracked a line from one corner of the roof to the other, then stopped above my bed. There was a sensation, not just hearing it, but feeling it. The fan rattled a fraction, the plant's leaves quivered, the glass of water by my bed shivered a ring like a seismograph before settling. And then my name. It was not voiced the way you say a name into a room. It was more like the shape of the vowels drawn through a straw, a breath manipulated into something like speech. But my name was there, syllables bent, the tone wrong, like hearing your voice on someone else's voicemail. I didn't answer. I lay there and watched the numbers tick on the clock. 2:16, 2:18. The steps resumed, slower. Step, step, they moved away. In the morning, I played the recording. My phone had captured the footfalls and something like static. When the static rose to a hiss, my name showed up like a camel in a cloud. My scalp prickled. I replayed it a dozen times. On the final replay, right after the hiss smoothed out, I heard my own breath on the recording catch, and then there was a soft knock. 3 taps that came from either the roof or the recorder case. It was hard to say. All I knew was that the knocks didn't happen in the room when I was awake. I started noticing other things. The plant under the window leaned away from the skylight, as if reluctant to be in line with it. The magnets on the fridge rearranged themselves, letters sliding into proximity until they spelled abo, of, before I shook them back into color stacks and forced myself to believe I had absent-mindedly done it. At odd hours, the faint tar smell populated the kitchen for a moment and then vanished, as if someone had cracked a lid on it to check if it was still there. I ran into the neighbor across the hall for the first time, a small woman in a gray sweater whose hair was the exact brown of cardboard. She moved like dust moves when a door opens. "You're new," she said. "Oliver," I offered. "Top floor." Her eyes flicked toward my ceiling. "Don't look up," she said quietly, then with a smile that tried too hard. "The skylight is bright, gets in your eyes." "Do you hear?" I started, but she was already fitting herself through the gap of her door, closing her smile along with it. By the 4th night, I decided to do something stupid, which is to say, I decided to be certain. I set a low stool under the skylight and dusted the glass with a light coat of flour, standing on tiptoe, the bowl balanced against my chest. My idea was to catch footprints if any appeared. It felt like setting a snare for an idea. I went to bed without the fan because the fan was beginning to feel like hiding. At 2:43, the flour recorded a story. I woke because the room had shifted. Air rearranged, the kind of pressure change that happens when an elevator stops at your floor. On the skylight, 2 pale ovals appeared in the flour, pressed from above. They weren't shoe treads. They were bare feet. The toes spread and lifted slightly as if testing balance, and flour flurried across the glass. I couldn't breathe. I watched the prints turn as if their owner was pivoting, placing one foot carefully in front of the other, crossing my skylight. The prints paused directly above my face. A shower of flour fell onto my cheeks, sticking to the dumb heat of my skin. The tar smell moved in like a quiet person. I reached for my phone and knocked it off the bed. It thumped onto the rug, face down, and something in my head shouted, "Don't drop the phone," like the concern belonged to someone else. "Who are you?" I whispered, a plea and a mistake. The feet shifted. The softest sound came down through the glass, like a tone being tuned into shape. "Home," the voice formed. The vowels were taut to a throat that didn't want them. "You're home." "I'm calling the police," I said, lying and sitting up all at once. The feet moved away from the skylight, but the sound of steps continued. On the roof, they circled again, paused. Then 3 precise knocks came from the frame. I froze. The knocks were inside the wood. The flower footprints faded in the night breeze, but the presence didn't. I wouldn't sleep again until I could manufacture morning. The landlord stopped answering me. I left him a message describing the flower, using words like trespassing and liability, but no one came. I told myself I was fine. Then I told myself I wasn't. I hacked at the paint around the edge of the skylight with a butter knife until the blade bent, feeling the softness in the old wood, imagining prying it open, imagining that if I did, something else would push back from the other side, eager. On the 5th day, my solutions turned ritualistic. I bought a cheap metronome from the lamp store, the guy behind the counter telling me it had been returned 3 times for running weird. I set it to 60 BPM on the floor under the skylight and let it click like a heart you could put in your pocket. The steps came that night exactly when the metronome got comfortable. They matched the tempo. Click, step, click, step. I shifted my weight in bed. The step above shifted with me. I tested it. 3 quick taps with my knuckles on the headboard. Above me, 4 taps, smug in their way, a correction. "You're copying me," I said before I could think. The silence that followed had something like hurt in it. It was a strange thought, then a stranger one. What if it wasn't copying? What if it was trying to teach? Everything after that happened because I found the hatch. It wasn't the roof door in the hall. That was useless theater. It was a small square cut into the ceiling of the closet, hidden under a shelf lined with someone else's decade of dust. I saw the seam by accident while trying to hang a second bar for coats I didn't have. The square was the size of a chessboard, on one side a recessed finger pull. By then I was sleeping in partials, careful to hover just above dreams, the way you float on a lake when you're scared of fish. I told myself that opening the hatch in daylight would puncture the spell. I put my hands on the finger pull and braced my feet on the back wall. The square came away with a groan. A ladder slid down into the closet like a tongue agreeing to a secret. The smell of the roof came through the hatch, tar, sun, a faint earthiness that didn't belong to the city. My heart began drumming stupid bravado. The metronome on the bedroom floor clicked once, twice, then stopped, like even it knew to shut up. I took the flashlight from the drawer where I kept light bulbs and tax envelopes and climbed. The space above the ceiling was a crawl. Then it opened into a low service corridor of metal and concrete. Light poured in through another hatch at the end, a square of bright day. Somewhere above that, the roof. I crawled toward it. The concrete was sandy to the touch, grains sticking to my palms. At the bright square I pushed. The hatch gave way. The day sharpened around me, white and mean. When I hoisted myself onto the roof, the city shrank to mute shapes. The bakery's exhaust pipe trembled with heat. The lamp shop sign hummed with a current I'd never heard from the street. The roof was covered in gray gravel that looked like the inside of a storm cloud. Across it, clear as a mapmaker's pen, a path had been pressed. 2 wrong-sized bare prints walking a slow circle, overlapping themselves again and again, shallow at the edges, deep over the skylight frames. I stood up, knees complaining, heart throwing elbows. "Hello?" My voice evaporated in the brightness. There was no door to the roof from the hallway, no chairs, no cigarette butts. Only gravel, tar seams, vents, and those paths, circles and small figure eights, as if someone were practicing walking or practicing staying in place. The bare footprints didn't lead to the hatch. They didn't lead to anything. They began and ended in front of my skylight. I didn't hear the first step so much as feel it, the gravel shifting behind me, the small dryness of it. I turned. No one. The hair along my arms went up. Another step, directly by my right shoulder, as if someone had moved from my blind spot to the other blind spot, having fun. "Stop," I said, which is what you say to a living person. The steps paused, as if considering whether I'd earned that. The air around me went cool and then colder still. My breath became visible, a thin flag in strong sunlight. "Home," the voice said. It came from the gravel at my feet and from somewhere under the skin of the day. "You're home." I backed toward the hatch and bumped my shin on the low curb of it. The steps advanced, not fast, not threatening in the way a ran at you would be, but with judicial certainty, like a thing that has decided you were always going to be exactly where you are. The prints formed in the gravel, pressing down, toes splayed a little too wide, arches shallow, as if the feet were flexible like hands. They stopped a foot in front of me. My own shoes looked cartoonish next to them. Clumsy, loud. "What do you want?" I asked, voice hoarse. My mouth tasted like old coins. The prints shifted. A chill moved through my ankles like someone pushing me into a pool. "Match," it said. The word thudded in the air. "Step." The meaning slid into me. It would continue until I stepped into its marked path. It would not break its circle. It needed me to join it. The path ended at my skylight because that was the point, the axis. That was where it got in, or tried to. In my mind, the flower footprints brightened, toes lifting, teaching weight. It wasn't wandering, it was practicing. If I stepped into the path, I understood in a way without language. I wouldn't step out. I would walk until I wore a ring in stone. The thought came with a second one so fast they felt like one thought splitting. Someone had stepped here before. Someone had matched, and then the circle had been kept by the next and the next. Not a ghost stumping around. A job. A role. "Who did this to you?" I asked. The wind answered, speaking fluent roof. The prints held their place, the gravel pressed deeper, as if the feet were rolling onto the ball, impatient. "Step," the voice coaxed. "No." My back foot found the hatch blind, clumsy, heel scraping metal. I grabbed the edge behind me with both hands like a toddler going down a slide and tried to drop. Something imperceptible shifted in the air, like a humlessness, like the space in a room right after the power dies. The footprints moved faster than they had, as if the idea of refusal made speed possible. They bounded the small distance between us and slammed into the fronts of my shoes. Cold swallowed my toes, then my feet. A thick cold, not like weather, but like a mold being poured. The gravel around my shoes sank as if my feet were weights lowered into a soft body. The feeling had memory in it, or something like it. Someone else's panic worn smooth from being experienced too long. "Step," it insisted. A care now, a father showing a child how to put foot in stirrup. My feet started to move, not because I moved them, but because something tried to teach them from the outside. My left foot lifted. It trembled in the air, almost seduced by the rhythm I had been rehearsing for nights, angeled forward. It would have been easiest to surrender. I thought of the things in my little apartment that would be left in place, cooling. The plant bending away from the skylight, the cup beside my bed, the metronome not daring to click. I thought absurdly of the bag of croissants the bakery lady handed me, the soapy curve of her smile. I thought of the landlord's denial, worn like a uniform. I pictured my neighbor's small mouth forming "Don't look up." She wasn't warning me about light. I wrenched my leg back. The entity tugged, a pressure that was not matter but obligation. The cold climbed my shin. My knee ached with the effort of refusing. In a stupid animal burst of inspiration, I reached down into my pocket and pulled out the only sharp thing I had, a chipped utility knife I used to open boxes. I flipped the blade with my thumb and, gritting my teeth, slashed it across my sock, then across my skin. Pain forced everything else out of the room. Warmth bloomed. The roof took the blood greedily. It annealed to the gravel, dark and immediate. The cold recoiled, as if I'd introduced a chemical it wasn't made to counsel. The pressure on my toes released. The footprints drew back, hesitant, as if learning about something new. A wrong step, a break in pattern. Blood throbbed through the cut and slicked my shoe. I staggered backward, fell into the hatch, and slid the 2 ridiculous feet of ladder like I was escaping a house fire. In the service corridor, the cold chased me for a second, this close of air, then hit an edge it couldn't cross. It stopped there, waiting like a mind at the lip of sleep. I pulled the hatch shut, turned, lost my balance, and crashed through coats into my closet. The noise sounded too large for my small life. I kicked the ladder wildly. It folded like a map. The hatch dropped into place. I shoved the shelf back with my shoulder until it met the wall with a pressed flesh sigh. Then I sat on the closet floor with my breath running out of format and my sock going red. The metronome on the floor started clicking again, slow, as if from far away. That night, there were no footsteps. The roof held its breath. The apartment was so quiet, I could hear the oil in the lamp store sign humming down through the wall. I stayed awake until the digital clock convinced me I was the last person alive with its blue numbers. When the bakery clattered pans in the morning, I cried in a way that felt like boiling water. I moved out 3 days later. The landlord didn't ask why. He didn't look me in the eye. He handed me my deposit in a behavior that had been well rehearsed. "You don't have anyone to take over the lease?" he asked, his voice polite and already bored. "Not for the top," I said. He nodded, something like relief crossing his face and then being hidden, as if he were a magician pocketing a coin. I took a smaller place 2 blocks over with a proper ceiling and windows that thought they were windows. The first night, I slept on boxes. The silence was a different kind here. No skylight, no roof like a second floor you didn't get to visit. I put the plant by the window and told it, "You're safe." It looked at me like plants look at us, with patience farther than time. At 3:13, the building sighed into a new shape, wood making its expanding noises. I woke like I'd been tugged. Not because of a sound exactly, because of a cadence that arrived inside my head without needing my ears. Somewhere 2 blocks away, above a bakery and a lamp shop, the roof recorded another circle. I lay there with my hand over the new scar on my foot, feeling the metronome of blood, and I understood the worst of it. It hadn't wanted to come in. It had wanted me to come out. In the weeks that followed, I changed my route to avoid that wedge of a building. When I failed, when I ended up on that street by accident, or because the city closed my habits without asking, I would cross to the far side and keep my eyes at chest level, like a good swimmer refusing to look down. It didn't matter. I could feel it from the sidewalk, a coldness that wasn't air, marking the edges of a circle nobody had drawn. Sometimes in the morning, I would see someone new descend those stairs, keys jangling, face blank with the work of pretending sleep is a choice. Once I saw my neighbor in the gray sweater carrying a potted plant to the second floor. She glanced up at the roof and looked away so fast it made my teeth hurt. If there is a resolved ending to this kind of story, I haven't found it. There is only the knowledge that the city is a machine for making echoes, and some echoes don't fade, they get hired. There is only the understanding that some jobs were invented by accident and then kept because someone kept them. At night, when a building settles or the wind does its old tricks, I press my foot into the mattress and feel the scar complain. I listen to the quiet and make sure it is quiet. I don't keep a clock with blue numbers anymore. I let the morning surprise me. Sometimes I wake at 3:13 anyway, sure that I have been summoned by the sound of steps toward a circle that refuses to close without me. I lie there and don't move. I don't match. I wait until the idea of walking drains out of the room like water. On good nights, I can pretend that all I hear is the bakery down the block and the city turning on its spine, both of us practicing in our different ways the art of staying in place. On bad nights, I imagine bare feet pressing into gravel in the bright noon of some other day, and the word rising from the roof like heat. Home. I was halfway between a storm and a story when I pulled off the motorway and into a town whose name looked like a typo. Hesseland. The rain had that thin, needling quality that wets you without admitting it, and the neon vacancy sign over the hotel flickered like a dying moth. I'd booked the place because it was cheap, and because, at the end of a long solo drive, any room that was warm and horizontal would do. Inside, the lobby smelled like citrus cleaner over something older and stranger, old books or damp velvet. A rubber plant sulked in one corner, refusing to look alive. The front desk clerk wore a navy vest and an expression that made me think he had opinions about everything, but shared none. His name tag said S. Hanley. "Reservation for Royce," I said, setting my card on the counter. He typed in that authoritative, arrhythmic way only hotel staff and surgeons manage. "Royce, yes, standard queen, 4th floor. We've upgraded you away from construction." His eyes glanced up just once, almost shyly. "You'll find it quiet." Quiet sounded like a luxury. My last few nights had been spent in roadside rooms that hummed with HVAC and neighbors who reenacted furniture moving. "Thanks." He slid 2 key cards toward me, then thumbed through a basket and added a laminated card, coffee brown with gold writing. "House notes." I tucked it into my jacket without looking. The elevator doors met in a brass seam that reflected my face as a smear of light. I pressed 4. The doors began to close, then hesitated, then closed again like someone reconsidering a sentence. As we rose, the elevator shuddered softly, coughed, and, for no reason, stopped at the 3rd floor. The doors opened onto a corridor of carpeting so deep it looked poured. The lights hummed and warmed the beige walls to the color of tea with too much milk. Plastic sheeting hung halfway down the hall, a translucent veil. Behind it, I thought I could see a ladder, a bucket, the square slump of a roller tray. "Not my stop," I told the elevator like it was a dog, but I stepped out anyway. The carpet swallowed my footfalls into a kind of polite silence. A draft touched the hair on my hands, not cold but persuasive. I moved toward the sheeting. A rectangle of light glowed behind it. One door, ajar, just enough to show a strip of the room beyond. Brass numbers on the door read 303. The 3 had a scratch through it, a hairline fracture. It's probably nothing, I thought, but nothing in me believed it. I listened. From behind the door came the tiniest tap, like someone drumming a fingernail against glass in patient Morse. I went back to the elevator. The doors had remained obligingly open. I pressed 4 again. As they slid shut, a motion at the edge of my vision, the sheeting quivered, made me think someone had walked behind it. Probably a worker, probably a draft. I watched the gap in the doors subtract the hallway from me until it became only my face again, a thread of light gone taut. My room on the fourth floor was cool and smelled the same citrus ancient as the lobby. The carpet was cleaner, the curtains newish, the bed tucked like a mouth that didn't want to open. I set my bag on the luggage rack and took out my laptop. I'd come to Hesselund to write about a forgotten railway spur that once fed the town's brickworks, mostly because I liked the word spur and the idea of small places that used to be important. The editor had given me 2 days, which felt like too long until I listened to the rain. 2 days might not be enough to empty this silence. I remembered the laminated house notes and slid it from my jacket. On one side, Wi-Fi, breakfast hours, a polite request not to cook fish in the microwave. On the other, third floor corridor is closed for maintenance. Please ignore courtesy check-in calls after midnight. We respectfully ask that mirrors remain affixed to the wall. I read the third line twice and laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because it was precisely not. I flipped the card over again, same seawall of banalities. I put it on the desk like a paperweight for a thought I hadn't had yet. At 3:03 in the afternoon, my phone vibrated with a number labeled hotel, a call at check-in time. I answered on speaker and kept typing. "Hello," my voice answered me. The same rhythm, the same skeptical patience. "Hello?" I muted, shook the phone, unmuted. "Who is this?" A breath. Then the other me hung up. When I called back, the line clicked into a wall of static like television snow haunted by a throat. I sat for a while and listened to the air conditioner breathe. I told myself it was some glitch. My phone reflected my face back at me in dark glass that made all the angles wrong. I set its screen down. By evening, the rain had clarified into a steady percussion, and I walked out to find food. Hesselund was a town that kept to itself. The supermarket was open. The kebab place was not. The streets were clean in a way that made them look embarrassed. I brought back a plastic container of soup and a sandwich that looked like the idea of a sandwich, 2 pale squares and a promise. Back in my room, I ate cross-legged on the bed and watched the wall instead of the television. At 11:47, I turned out the lights and lay listening to the rain. It took the shape of everything it struck: window, gutter, the aluminum lip of the AC unit. The room felt like a bowl with me in it. I drifted between the anchor of the pillow and the weightless place where sleep almost happens. I woke when the unit clicked off, and the room's quiet came rushing in like a tide. The phone rang once, a single, small ring, like the throat clearing of an insect. I fumbled for it, saw the time, 3:03 a.m., which seemed like a practical joke, and swiped to answer. Static filled the room, the good old-fashioned kind that sounds like dressing rust. Under it, footsteps in carpeting. The line hissed, then pushed through an absence that felt like speech. Something like my name unfurled, not said but suggested, as if my name were a tag in an empty room. "Hello?" I asked, and my voice sounded amateur, unschooled compared to the hush. This isn't funny. The static swelled and then folded down. The line went dead with a sound too soft to be a click. It was more like something looking away. I lay there, heart trying out faster tempos. The room felt colder. The citrus cleaner scent had thinned to let through the deeper, quieter odor, old linen, old water. I breathed in and tasted iron. The rain had stopped. I must have slept in patches after that. At 4:20 I woke to a soft rustle, the sound of paper being slid beneath my door. I turned on the lamp with my arm over my eyes, then peered over the edge of the bed. Nothing on the carpet. When I padded to the door and looked out into the corridor, it was empty. I looked through the peephole for longer than I should have. On that fisheye lens, the hall bulged toward me in a way that made distance dishonest. I watched the numbers on the opposite door slowly resolve. 304. Behind me, something ticked once, the sound of a marble hitting glass. I turned, heart in the throat again, but nothing had moved. Back in bed, I reminded myself that every unfamiliar room has its own collection of noises you think are personal. Buildings are wood and air, and they settle, they exhale. The mind finds footsteps in the shrug of ductwork, whispers in wiring. No one had slid a note under my door. The phone hadn't rung with my voice. I had been driving all day, and too much coffee makes thoughts dissolve into ghosts. I woke finally to daylight that had the color of milk left out too long. I showered, shaved, and stood at the sink, losing myself in the mirror. It was heavy, a slab of glass in a black wooden frame bolted to the wall. When I leaned close, the silver at the edges had a fine, moth-eaten look. I breathed on it and drew a dot with my finger, felt stupid, wiped it off with a towel. Downstairs, Hanley asked me, "All well with your room?" His tone suggested that he knew everything wouldn't be, but he was hoping for an argument in his favor. "Sure," I said. "All quiet. What's with the third floor?" He repaired his expression. "Maintenance. Smelled like paint thinner." He nodded, pleased with my confirmation. "What about the courtesy calls after midnight?" I asked like I was making a joke. His smile dropped and broke into pieces. "Ignore them," he said. "We advise that." Then, with a studied brightness, "Cream with your coffee?" Outside, the town looked better in daylight. Across from the hotel was a low building with boarded windows, a former restaurant named the Sunroom in cheerful pastel letters that made the boards ironic. The railway spur was a line of gravel that wove like a seam behind the houses. I walked it for hours, listening to my boots make a steady argument with the stones. The town offered me small pleasures, the hiss of wind in poplars, a heron lifting off a ditch with annoyed patience. I took photographs and wrote lines that felt honest, if not yet good. I returned at dusk with the fatigue that feels clean. Evening filled the corridor like water fills a glass. My room greeted me with its own thin smile. The air conditioner breathed out cold as a borrowed shirt. I reheated the soup in the microwave and ate standing up, then brushed my teeth, watching myself watch myself in the mirror. On the desk, the house notes lay face up. "Don't remove mirrors," it reminded me, a rule so odd it was tempting just to break it to see why it had been made. A little before midnight, I heard a soft footfall above me. I glanced up and then remembered I was on the top floor. The second step came diagonally across the ceiling, then paused. The pause might have killed me if the third step hadn't happened quickly. "Old building," I told the air, trying to reduce it. I texted a friend, "Insomnia Hotel bingo, mystery footsteps, courtesy calls, ghosts," and waited for the three dots to flicker back. They didn't. I put my phone face down again. The quiet had developed a pulse. Around 1, I made tea because moving felt like an argument with fear. The kettle turned the tap water into a rumor of steam. The tea tasted like hot paper, but it warmed my hands. I set the cup on the desk, its little clink sounding far too loud, like I had thrown it. The mirror reflected the bed, the desk, the half-open bathroom door. Nothing clever. I stared at it until my eyes watered and shapes tried to step out of the blur. I blinked them away. I knew a trick fear plays is to turn every corner into a person. A coat becomes a man, a shadow becomes a fact. I closed the bathroom door. The room felt wrong with it shut, so I opened it again. At 3:02, the building held its breath. The air changed, without movement, without sound, like pressure on the inside of your ears just before a descent. The phone on the nightstand pulsed with backlight and then slept again. I stood beside the bed waiting for a ring that might not come. The ring was small and complete. I let it end. It rang again, chastened. On the third ring I picked up. "Royce," a voice said, and if a name could be pronounced in a smile, mine was. The voice was my voice, except everything that made it mine had been buffed out. The hesitation, the chew. What remained was a clinical copy. "You're me," I said, trying to flatten it into sarcasm and hearing fear leak in around the edges. "It's time," the voice said gently. "You know what to do. Open the wardrobe." I didn't look at the wardrobe. I looked at the mirror. In the glass, my face regarded me like a co-conspirator. A wind rose I couldn't feel but could hear, a deepening hush. The wardrobe had been a presence, big and quiet in the room, the way a second person might be. It was old. Cherry wood rubbed the color of dried blood, a keyhole like a staring eye. "Why?" I asked the phone. My own question, my rhythms returned, but the inflections were wrong, too patient, like humoring a child. "Because we keep our promises," it said. The line did not go dead. Instead, it drew away a little. I could hear it breathing. It sounded like room tone on an old cassette. "Who are you?" I asked, because we asked the wrong questions first. The voice exhaled. The mirror caught a fractional motion, a delay so subtle it could have been the kind of lag you notice on bad video calls. But I wasn't on a call. I was in a room with my reflection. I moved toward the mirror and raised my hand. The hand in the glass rose too, but a fraction behind mine. Not a technology lag, a decision lag, like it was waiting to see what I would do and then agreeing to it. "I'm leaving," I told the room and the phone and the mouth in the mirror. I shoved my laptop into my bag and yanked open the door. The corridor outside was longer than it had been, or maybe the light was weaker. The carpet had the color of water at night. I moved left toward the elevator. The red LED above it read 3. The doors were open onto darkness, the kind that doesn't look like lack, but like substance. A thin draft slid against my tongue, wet, mineral. Behind me, from my room, came the smallest sound. Wood, thinking about moving. I stabbed the stairwell door and hit the flights at speed. The stairwell had concrete steps and the kind of echo that makes solitude sound like company. Down one flight, 3 to 2. The door at 2 was locked. Down another flight, 2 to 1. The door at 1 had a handwritten sign, "Use lobby." I pushed. It didn't move. I shouldered it. In the echo, something upstairs shouldered back. "Okay," I told nobody, and nobody agreed. I climbed back up, anger making my breath hot. At the 3rd floor landing, the corridor waited like a patient throat. My door was open now, a dark rectangle. The number 303 leaned crookedly, as if it were tired. Inside, the phone lay on the floor, handset off the cradle, as if it had leaned down to listen. My mirror waited, polite, heavy with light. The wardrobe door had swung open while I was away. Its interior was dim. A smell came out of it, stale promises, old wool, river stones. "Don't," I said, and heard my tone reflect off the mirror and return with a different ending, like a word pronounced wrong in another language. The mirror's face, my face, smiled first. I grabbed the chair from the desk and threw it at the mirror, not because I believed in breaking spells, but because I needed a sound that belonged to me. The glass didn't shatter the way it does in films. It cracked down the center, a white lightning bolt photographing itself. The crack made the room stutter, a microsecond of absence, as if reality had flinched. From the wardrobe a scuff, the barest sound of a foot learning a floor again. I ran. The door frame caught my shoulder and sent a flare of pain into my neck. I slammed the hall door closed behind me and jammed my foot against it. The chain slid into place on its own, a metal sigh, as if the room had still been holding it. Then the chain slid back out of place with the self-same sound. The door pushed, my foot held. The push was gentle at first, reasonable, then insistent like a friend who knows better. I flexed and shoved and felt my shoe slide on the carpet. "Stop," I said, like it could hear. From the other side, my voice said through the wood, "Open the wardrobe." I don't remember deciding. I let go and ran for the elevator. The hall stretched, contracted, did that thing long corridors do in nightmares where the end keeps stepping away. I stabbed the button. The doors opened on the 3rd floor corridor again. The same carpet, the same hum, the same plastic sheeting farther down, catching a breath. A figure moved behind the sheeting, pale and tall. I stepped backward. The doors closed. I hit the stairs. I didn't try the doors. I ran until breath burned and legs complained. Somewhere between floors, the handrail felt warmer under my palm, like it had been held recently by someone frantic. As I slowed, the temperature dropped out of the air the way it does right before a storm, even if there is no wind. The stairwell smelled like rain, stagnant and old, as if the building remembered weather. I reached the 2nd floor landing and opened the door onto the 3rd floor corridor. The numbers stared at me, 301, 302, 303. The carpet was still water. The plastic sheeting flinched a little, as if something just behind it had laughed. I began to understand that the building had decided and that decisions once made are very hard to undo without loss. I turned back into my room, because where else would I go when the hall was already inside me? The mirror waited with its hairline crack, delicate as a vein. In its surface I saw myself standing in the doorway, one shoulder lower from where it had struck the frame, hair a mess, eyes wide and wrong. Behind me in the mirror, the wardrobe door finished opening. "Listen," I said to the mirror, to myself, to the space that pressed against the corners of the room. "I'm not the person you want." The mirror smiled the way people smile when they know something about you that you don't. From inside the wardrobe came the sound of fabric shifting. A hand appeared on the edge of the door. The skin was the color hands have after they've been in water a very long time. It left no prints on the wood. Then the rest of it, a person but reduced, like a body that had folded in on itself to fit, stepped out and unfolded a little. It was not anyone I recognized, and also the exact outline of everyone you pass in a hallway without noticing. It shone the way the underside of the tongue does, slick and intimate. Its face was mine, until it wasn't, until it was only the idea of a face. I grabbed the bedside lamp and yanked the cord out of the socket. The bulb went dark but hot, and I held it like a weapon, a poor one. The thing's head tilted, curious. In the mirror, my reflection held the lamp too, but wrong-handled like a badly rehearsed mime. "Open the wardrobe," my voice said again, patient as an operator. "It's already open," I said. "You're not listening," my voice answered, and then the phone on the floor began to ring with small determination. 1 ring, 2, 3. On the 4th, the world did a little tilt, and the door behind my reflection in the mirror, a door that did not exist in my room, swung inward. Through it, I could see another corridor. The carpeting was a different pattern, blue, not beige. The air beyond had a different temperature. My reflection stepped toward that door, and I watched my own back retreating. "Wait," I said, and meant it the way you do when you're trying to be your future self's conscience. The reflection paused, looked over its shoulder, and smiled a version of my smile that meant, "You had your chance to be afraid earlier. Now you have to be brave." I ran at the mirror. The crack line widened, singing glass songs. I hit it with the lamp like a priest who has lost the words and only has the bell. The glass surrendered in a rush, and I fell through, not into the room, but into the exact cold that had been standing where I was going to be. For an instant, I knew the room the way a fish knows a bowl, the curve of it, the limits, the way the light leans. I hit the carpet on my knees, and the smell of iron jumped up and put its hands on my face. The thing from the wardrobe touched my shoulder with a softness that humiliated me. I twisted and slammed my elbow into it. It didn't move the way bodies move. It absorbed. The phone rang again. Each ring narrowed the tunnel I was in. Through the mirror's jagged mouth, I could see the other corridor across an impossible seam. My reflection glanced back once more, like a goodbye, and then stepped through its door into another version of the hotel. The door shut. The crack sealed itself a millimeter, and the room exhaled as if satisfied. I crawled, graceless, to the hall, dragging my bag like the defeated. The corridor accepted me without comment. This time, when I stabbed the stairwell door, it opened, and the stairs led down to a lobby that smelled like coffee and the normal despair of morning. The sky outside the glass was a good, honest gray. I didn't stop to check out. I spilled into the wet day like I'd been poured. My car was where I'd left it, patient as a dog. I drove, and Hesseland let me go. On the motorway, the rain started again in a polite way. The radio offered me a station speaking a language I almost knew. I drove until the hotel was something in the mirror, and then I drove until the mirror only showed things that were actually behind me. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. "Bank charge alert," it said in clean capital letters. "Marrow Hotel, additional night, room 303. The timestamp was 3:03 a.m. I pulled into a rest area and sat with the ignition off. The air cooled fast. I looked at my face in the rear view and saw a hairline crack in the image, just for a second, like a string catching the light across a stage. It wasn't the glass. It was the reflection, a seam where a choice might have been. I held my phone for a long time, feeling the weight of it like an obligation. When it buzzed again, I almost dropped it. "Call from hotel." It said, polite as grocery store receipts. I watched it ring out. It rang again. On the third ring, I put it to my ear and listened not to the static and not to the footsteps, but to my own voice coming from somewhere quieter. "It's time. You know what to do." I ended the call and powered the phone off. Maybe that's what bravery looks like somewhere, refusing to be narrated. The highway sighed in long vowels. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, into the steady streaming patience of rain. In my mind, I saw the third-floor corridor breathing in and breathing out, wondering whose turn it was and whether it had chosen correctly this time. In a different hotel in a different town, something that wore my face might be opening a different wardrobe. Maybe it would find a corridor with a new pattern of carpet, a new way of being trapped. A week later, when I checked my credit card statement online, There were 3 charges from the Marrow Hotel, all at 3:03 a.m., and a fourth I didn't understand. Housekeeping, mirror repair. I called the number on the statement. It rang once, twice, then connected to nothing, so clean it sounded like relief. "Hello," I said into it, and my voice went somewhere I hope I never recognize. If you ever find yourself in a place that insists on being quieter than it should be, if you ever see a door ajar in a corridor that isn't yours, if a room asks you to keep its mirrors affixed to the wall, believe it. If the phone rings at 3:03, let it ring until it grows bored of you. And if you don't, if you do answer, if you meet your own voice and it sounds perfected, don't open the wardrobe. You'll think you're only disobeying a rule. You'll think the rule is silly. It isn't. The last time I passed an old hotel on a long drive, another town with a name like a shrug, I saw a figure at a third-floor window, a silhouette with my impatience, my particular tilt. It raised its hand a fraction behind mine. The rain hit the glass between us and erased our hands in equal measure. I drove on. It's quieter where I sleep now, but sometimes around 3, the world draws one long, polite breath, and the shadows in the room decide which of them is mine. I keep my mirrors bolted down. I ignore every courtesy. But I understand now why stories like this survive. They are house notes in human language, rules we give the next occupant because escape and explanation don't always arrive in the same breath. And sometimes, in the cold minute between 3:02 and 3:04, I think I hear a phone ring once in the distance, like a reminder sent from one side to the other, from 3:03 to me, because somewhere, inevitable as rain, the room has decided and it is time again.